I just had my coconut. What was it? I just had my grande coconut milk mocha macchiato from Starbucks. Yeah, it was like $8. It's the sacrifices you have to make. Hey, have you ever heard of Mount Pinatubo? This gorgeous volcano was dormant for hundreds of years, and residents living nearby had no idea it was planning on cooking up an eruption in the near future. Nor did anybody expect it to be the second biggest eruption of the 20th century. It was about 5 times larger than Mount Saint Helens. And I'm sure you've seen Mount Saint Helens. Now imagine that.
But 5 times larger.
But this catastrophe ended up being at the worst possible time imaginable, and I'll explain why. But let me introduce you to nature's pressure cooker, Mount Pinatubo. Located on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, Mount Pinatubo historically was considered a calm and quiet mountain by the locals. Sitting dormant for roughly 500 years, its slopes were heavily forested, and many locals, including the indigenous Eta people, had no living memory or oral history of any major eruptions. Geologically, however, Pinatubo was far from inactive. It is a stratovolcano formed by layers of lava, ash, and volcanic debris, an indicator of explosive potential. Beneath the surface, magma slowly accumulated over centuries, building pressure without obvious warning signs. Earthquakes prior to the eruption were warning signs that went unheeded, with those affected not knowing the source of the shaking was from the mountain itself. Hundreds of small earthquakes were being recorded for months prior to the eruption, and this coincided with steam explosions and ground deformation. These earthquakes were measured using seismometers, installed after the unrest began, many being operated by the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, with assistance from the U.S. Geological Survey. This seismic data, combined with gas emissions and surface changes, allowed scientists to accurately forecast a major eruption and pushed for mass evacuations just days before the ultimate eruption. Tens of thousands of residents fled, including the indigenous Eta tribes, with very few staying behind, not sold to the idea that the quiet mountain would ultimately erupt. But while there was unrest underneath the soil, there was also an atmospheric unrest taking place high above the mountain. Typhoon Yunya rapidly developed off the coast of East Samar, growing in size and peaking as a Category 3 hurricane. Strong wind shear off the Philippines allowed the storm to start to decay, hitting the island as a minimal typhoon, but a strong storm nonetheless. The storm brought heavy rains and flooding, with sustained wind speeds of 120 miles per hour and a pressure low of 950 millibars. A small blast at 3:41 p.m. on June 12th marked the beginning of disaster, as millions of cubic yards of gas-charged magma reached the surface and exploded in the reawakening of the volcano's first spectacular eruption. A few hours later that same day, massive blasts lasting about a half an hour generated big eruption columns, which quickly reached a height of over 62,000 feet. 14 hours later, a 15-minute blast hurled volcanic matter to the heights of 15 miles. Friction in the uprushing ash column generated abundant volcanic lightning. Whoa, volcanic lightning? Yes! Volcanic lightning is an electrical discharge caused by a volcanic eruption rather than an ordinary thunderstorm. Volcanic lightning arises from colliding fragment particles of volcanic ash, which generate static electricity within the volcanic plume. On June 15, 1991, everything came together to create a catastrophic event that would leave lasting effects seen for generations to come. Mount Pinatubo erupted at 1:42 p.m. local time, clouding the skies with 5 cubic kilometers of ash and earth materials. For size comparison, 5 cubic kilometers of ash is about roughly 2 million Olympic swimming pools worth of material, or the volume of about 4,775 Empire State Buildings. While evacuations had already begun a few days prior to the eruption and landfall of Yunya, conditions worsened severely for those still trying to escape. The storm brought heavy rainfall, strong winds, and flooding, with an atmosphere already full of ash. The combination of ash with the storm's heavy rains led to massive lahars, fast-moving volcanic mud flows made of ash, debris, and water. These lahars surged down river valleys for years after the eruption, burying communities, destroying infrastructure, and permanently reshaping the landscape. Due to Yunya's circulation, the massive cloud of ash produced by the eruption was moistened and redistributed over the Philippines instead of blowing out to sea, greatly exasperating the impact of the event. Many of the eruption's fatalities were not caused by lava or pyroclastic flows, but by ash-laden rain overwhelming buildings. Wet ash is extremely heavy, and this caused roofs of regular buildings, as well as evacuation shelters and abandoned homes, to collapse, even miles away from the volcano. Power outages and storm damage made it harder to coordinate emergency responses in real time, and shelters that did manage to stay standing were overwhelmed as people evacuated not just for the volcano, but for the extreme flooding and storm conditions. At lower altitudes, the volcanic ash was blown in all directions by the intense cyclonic winds of the coincidentally occurring typhoon, and winds at higher altitudes blew the ash southwestward. Fine ash fell as far away as the Indian Ocean, and satellites tracked the ash cloud several times around the globe. After hitting the Philippines, Yunya crossed into the South China Sea, slowly collapsing into a minimal tropical storm. Persistent wind shear prevented the system from strengthening, and the storm ultimately degraded into a tropical depression the next day. Having turned north within a break in the subtropical ridge, Yunya brushed the southern tip of Taiwan late on June 16th before dissipating the following day within the westerlies. While Yunya's wrath was short-lived, the volcano's activity persisted for roughly over 2 months following the initial eruption. Ultimately, Mount Pinatubo had its final eruption in 1993 until it was finally quiet again for the Zambales Mountains. Mount Pinatubo's explosion was massive enough to create a crater in the earth, with following storms and monsoons in the area rapidly filled the crater with water, creating Lake Pinatubo. A small lava dome began forming under the lake, raising the temperature and acidity of the lake to a pH of 2, and a temperature of 104 degrees Fahrenheit until subsequent rainfall cooled and diluted the lake, lowering the temperature to 79 degrees Fahrenheit and raising the pH to 5.5 by 2003. Nearly 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide were injected into the stratosphere in Pinatubo's 1991 eruptions, and the dispersal of this gas cloud around the world caused global temperatures to drop from 1991 through 1993 by about 1 degree Fahrenheit. The eruption has drastically changed the face of central Luzon, home to about 3 million people. About 20,000 indigenous Aida Highlanders who had lived on the slopes of the volcano were completely displaced. About 200,000 people who evacuated from the lowlands surrounding Pinatubo before and during the eruptions have returned home but faced continued threats from lahars for many years following the disaster. Some towns had to be permanently relocated because they were too vulnerable to future mudflows. Rice paddies and sugarcane fields that had not been buried by lahars have recovered, but those buried by lahars took many years to recover. As much of these lands were initially considered a lost cause, the mineral-rich ash and mud that covered the land ultimately became fertile soil again within a few years. For many locals, recovery was not measured in months, but in decades. Unfortunately, after being driven away by the eruption, in May of 2009, some 454 Aida families in Pampanga were given the first clean ancestral land ownership on Mount Pinatubo, with the Certificate of Ancestral Domain title by the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. And on January 14, 2010, some 7,000 Aida families from Zambales were officially granted the Certificate of Ancestral Domain title covering the Zambales side of Pinatubo, which includes the summit and Lake Pinatubo, officially granting ownership of their ancestral land. Mount Pinatubo is still a gold mine of information, and it remains one of the most studied volcanoes in the world. While the volcano itself has been relatively quiet since the 90s, it is still officially considered an active volcano, and regular monitoring is performed daily. Mount Pinatubo may no longer be erupting, but it remains a living laboratory for volcanology, climate science, and geologic disaster research. Overall, evacuations and preparedness saved thousands of lives and at least $250 million in property. But in the wake, it took the lives of around 800 to 900 people and destroyed upwards of $1 billion of property. While the number of lives lost seems incredibly high, because of the successful evacuations, tens of thousands of lives were thankfully spared, highlighting the power of modern science and disaster preparation awareness. For the people who lived in its shadow, the story of Pinatubo isn't just about ash clouds and shockwaves. It's about survival. Entire communities rebuilt, families returned. The land, once buried, slowly became fertile again. Pinatubo reminds us that while nature can overwhelm us, preparation, science, and resilience can save lives. Also, fun fact, long before Mount Pinatubo became famous for its cataclysmic eruption, Philippine President Ramon Magsaysay, a native of Zambales, named his C-47 presidential plane Mount Pinatubo. The plane then crashed into Mount Manugal in Cebu province in 1957. Killing the president and 24 others on board. Not great. But that's all I have for you today. So stay safe. I know this one's a little different, but with the involvement of the hurricane and the eruption at the same time, I just feel it was a pretty cool disaster that I feel like not a lot of people have talked about comparatively to like Mount Saint Helens. And like, don't get me wrong, Mount Saint Helens is super cool. The footage is super cool. I get it. But there are a lot of, other volcanoes out there. But let me know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, share. Yeah. Thank you.